The opinions and statements made by the guests of the Success in Practice podcast are their own, and I do not endorse or accept responsibility for their positions. Any information given by myself or the guests is educational in intention and not to be taken as medical advice. If you choose to act on the content involved in the podcast, you do so at your own risk. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Success in Practice podcast. Today, I'm joined by Stephen King. Stephen is an osteopath, physiotherapist, personal trainer, and strength and conditioning coach who travels the world each year helping other health professionals help their patients and clients utilizing data-driven assessment. Steve thinks a bit differently, and that's why he's at the forefront of multiple industries helping reform health and fitness professions through his positions on committees and boards at Sports Medicine Australia, the Australian Physiotherapy Association, Victoria, and RMIT Universities, Massage Australia, and Osteopathy Australia as well. Steve loves working with a range of injuries, focusing on running and ACL injuries and those tricky problems that other health fitness professionals have struggled with. Steve treats a lot less these days, and he's also the Director of Movement Assessment Technologies and host of the 21st Century Physio podcast and the Physiotherapy Symposium. Steve has sold his practice and technology company Strength by Numbers to now focus on expanding his courses beyond the 30 plus countries and creating technology that is quick, simple, and affordable to allow all health and fitness professionals the ability to access life-changing technology. Having a unique background, being a dual master qualified physiotherapist and osteopath, as well as a strength and conditioning coach, Steve is aware of the key issues and fitness, the key health issues, and fitness, and the things that fitness professionals around the world face. Steve, thanks for joining me, mate. I know we've been trying to tee this up for a little bit, and we finally made it. Thanks for being here.
No, sensational. I'm really excited to be here, and looking forward to getting into it, mate, and digging deep on some of those topics you tend to.
Right. So let's get started where we always get started, and this is what people I think are really interested in: is your backstory. Tell us about you, Stephen, growing up. Where'd you grow up? Where you went to school? What are some of your early influences, and what got you into osteopathy?
Yeah, look, I guess I had a bit of a varied background. I grew up a combination of here in Bayside in Melbourne, in Victoria, so nice and close to the beach. But I also spent 5 years living in Papua New Guinea, which through my sort of primary school sort of years into early high school. And for me, that sort of really opened the world to me and sort of, different cultures and that sort of thing, and allowed me to make a lot of friends and have different influences. So that was something I was really lucky with. And then going on from high school, I sort of initially got into an arts commerce degree, and I sort of thought, I'm not sure if that's what I want to do. So I took a year off after high school, went and lived in Italy, a little medieval hilltop castle in central Italy where no one else spoke English. You get home after a day's work, just doing some builder's labouring to pay for the travels, and you'd have the 90-year-old sort of nonnas, sort of grandmas out the front on the bench, and you'd go out there and they'd have dinner ready for you and stuff. And so for me over that time, I realised, look, arts, commerce probably wasn't exactly what I wanted to do. And for me, I'd always been interested in, health and fitness and sports. And so the natural progression for me was to start to look into sort of physiotherapy, osteopathy, and sort of chiropractic as well. And I had a friend going into osteopathy, and sort of she convinced me that it was the right path to take. And, now 20 years later, I'm sort of, thankful for her decision.
Who was that
her
friend?
Guidance. That was Rhiannon Clancy. So we sort of spent a lot of time growing up together, and we went through university together, and it was a really good experience, and still good friends to this day.
Well, shout out to Rhiannon. Thanks for doing that.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a lot to thank her for. Maybe a lot I need to chat to her about as well.
Mate, tell us, where did you study? Which university did you opt to go to?
So I studied at Victoria University, so in Melbourne,
Okay.
where a lot of, osteopaths in Australia go through. And while I was doing my studies in osteopathy, I also did my studies in personal training as well and sports training, and worked a lot as a personal trainer and sports trainer through my osteopathy studies, which I think, really probably helped me sort of as I got into practice and into my career, and lucky enough to work with some really good osteopaths as a sports trainer, which for me, with people like Luke Fuller, sort of working at the Tassie Devils in the VFL, sort of gave me a really nice influence on that, I guess, sports side and what you can do outside the treatment room as an osteopath.
Yeah. So when did you start at Victoria University?
It's going back to 2006, I'm going to say now.
Right. So you started then. I assume you would have graduated in 2011?
2010, yeah.
2010, sorry, 2010.
Yep.
Okay, so you did that. And tell us about that time of your life. So at university, Victoria University, who were some of the people there that you look back on and kind of were influential? Some of the people that taught you, and what was that time like for you at Victoria University?
I think that was, probably one of the best times of my life. I think, there's not too often that you get to turn up 5 days a week and, hang out with your best mates and, learn some, really cool and interesting stuff. Yeah, it was obviously a pretty difficult time as well. Obviously, there's not too many courses where you have 15 sort of exams and, 10 often in the same day. So it was definitely a challenging time trying to manage that alongside sort of other studies and work and those types of things. But for me, I was really lucky, get exposed to some great people at university. And look, there's probably too many to mention, but, people like Brett Vaughan, good friends still today, sort of influenced me a lot and, has really helped shape the profession. So I've got a lot to thank Brett for, I think. People like Heath Williams, we're talking, Grant Burrows. So again, people sort of from a movement-based approach who probably started to get me thinking a little bit differently.
Yeah, right. Okay, so, and was there anything kind of in your university education at that time that you still cling on to today in terms of what you're doing in the in the tech space? Like, was it? I know that the two, one's very physiology, anatomy, kind of hands-on stuff. But were there any lessons that you learned back then that you still kind of look back on now when you're doing a lot more tech stuff that you find quite valuable?
I think just the thought process that osteopathy brings and looking at the body, I guess, as a unit and, looking at how one area of the body can affect the other. I think that's something that's, and then allowed me to, with the data-driven approach and, what we've been pushing now for the last, 10 to 15 years is really sort of set up the framework for that and allowed it to, transform across different professions as well and start to get some of those other professions which are often pretty honed into, I guess the specific symptom, starting to look a little bit more wider and take a bit more of that philosophy. So I think that that clinical reasoning really helped, and obviously the foundation in anatomy and physiology, pathology was really important as well. Because we'll probably talk about it soon. But when I went back and did my master's in physiotherapy, there wasn't any of that really covered at all. So there's some big gaps in that course.
Right, and okay, so excuse me. You graduated. What happened then, Stephen? Where'd you go? Where'd you work? Who did you work with? And what were the choices in your mind about that?
Yeah, so I was really fortunate. So I went out into private practice with Simon Narocki and Lorraine Griffiths, and I was really, sort of lucky to get some good experience in private practice. But for me at the time, I probably couldn't see myself working in the 3x3 treatment room. And I really was struggling to take the patients that I'd been training from a personal training point of view and put them on the table and take those patients who I was treating on the table and get them up and get moving. And so for me, I thought there was something missing. And so I went back and added another $20,000 to my HECS sort of debt and went back and did my master's in physiotherapy, hoping that would, fill in some of those gaps. And I remember there was one specific patient, who probably for me was the person who made that decision. They came in with a right hamstring strain. They were an AFL football player. And so for me, I did, what I've been taught at university. I sort of, did some observation, had a look at their pelvis levels and rotations, their leg lengths. I pushed on their leg to test their muscle strength, got in there, had a feel of the tissues, and it was a bit tender and sore. The strength was a bit weak. The range of motion and flexibility was a bit reduced. And I thought, great, I know what it is. The course has taught me well. It's a grade 1 hamstring strain. So I went and did some treatment, gave them a few exercises, did that for, 3 or 4 weeks and got to the point where they were able to get returned to training pain-free. I could get in there and do all the tests. They weren't painful. They had full strength when I pushed on their leg. And so I said, get back onto the sporting field. You're good to go. But what happened 3 weeks later? They came back and they hobbled back in again with the same thing. And so I got in there and I thought, it's me. It's my treatment techniques aren't good enough. I didn't balance the pelvis properly. I didn't get those leg lengths sort of level. My soft tissue skills weren't good enough. So I went back and did more soft tissue, gave them more exercises and, heavy strengthening exercises. And again, 3 or 4 weeks later, they were feeling good, pushed on their leg, they were strong, got in there, palpated, no tenderness, good range of motion. I said, good, you're good to go back to the sports field. And what happened 6 weeks later? They came back with an ACL injury. So for me, I was pretty deflated and, I thought there's something I'm missing here. And so that's where I went back and did my master's in physio, hoping that would fill the gap.
Right. So what made you think that the master's in physio would fill that gap for you? Like, what was the gap? I mean, did you identify what was missing in I guess, your approach and then go for physio then?
Yeah, so I guess, my feeling was, potentially in the exercise prescription, there wasn't a lot regarding that in the osteopathy course at the time. And so I thought, look, maybe I'm going to go and do physiotherapy. And, there's obviously physiotherapy tends to have a good correlation or association with sort of sports. So I thought, look, that's probably the path that I need to take those people, in particular people like that patient, a little bit further. But what I found out is, we only had 1 2-hour Pilates class for exercise prescription in the whole Masters of Physiotherapy, alongside 1 2-hour palpation class, 1 2-hour PNF, sort of muscle energy class, 1 2-hour manipulation class. So really, it didn't probably give me the skills that I was hoping it would bring. I learned a lot about myself in that period. It really helped my clinical reasoning. And, I was lucky enough at the time, there was that sort of pain science revolution, and UniSA in South Australia where I went was at the heart of that with Dave Butler and Lorimer Mosley. So I learned a lot about that, but probably didn't really help what I sort of, my intentions were at the start in regards to exercise prescription and taking people beyond the 3x3 treatment room.
Okay, so let me dig a bit deeper there. When you were using your osteopathic training before you did your masters in physiotherapy, and you mentioned that case with the athlete who had a torn hamstring, and then they came back and they kind of done it again, and then they came back and they had an ACL strain. You mentioned that you thought that there was a gap around your exercise prescription, and you wanted to fill that gap. Do you remember what particular exercises were you handing out as an osteopath? Like, what were you getting them to do in the strength field to get them rehabilitated post-treatment? What was that like?
Yeah, so there's probably some squats, some RDLs in there, I imagine at the time, probably some hip bridges and those types of things. But the capacity and the level that I was giving those exercises, were probably well below actually the demands and capacity of what that person needed to be able to get out onto the sporting field and be able to sprint at 25 to 30 kilometres an hour and change direction at the same time while bending down and picking up a ball or trying to evade an opponent. So for me, I think, the exercises are probably similar to what a lot of people would prescribe today in regards to, going ahead and strengthening that hamstring sort of muscle. But you've really got to, for me, you've got to consider now taking people, I guess, beyond it and what are the actual demands and capacities of that. And often you can't sort of tend to assess all of those things that well in that 3x3 treatment room potentially.
Right. So what you're telling me is that it mightn't be your exercise selection that was a problem. It was more so that you hadn't allowed for the building of capacity before they went back onto the field.
Yeah,
which would probably include some more targeted strength goals, and probably some more graded return to sport goals as well. And probably knowing what you know now, would that be a fair assessment?
100%. I think if, my assessment, that I learned at university, with that traditional orthopedic sort of approach that we're all taught, takes someone so far. But what we sort of see is the demands of someone's particular task, especially for that footballer, their demands are up here. So if my assessment only stops here, look, my treatment and training is potentially is only going to stop there as well. And so, what I've found over the last 10 to 15 years is if we can take our assessment further back towards what the demands are of the sport and see what the real, I guess, deficits are, then hopefully if we're assessing further and assessing those capacities and forces, then we're going to take our treatment and training a little bit further as well. Yeah,
okay. All right, so going back to your early career, you were obviously treating as an osteopath. You would probably got some work with a sports team from what you were telling me. How long did that stage of your career last where you were kind of treating, patient lists and so forth as an associate, I'm assuming? Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. So I worked as an associate for 1 year before going back and doing that master's in physiotherapy, and worked for
Yep.
2 years as an associate, sort of as an osteopath, part-time through the intensive master's physiotherapy course, where I could pretty
Yep.
much still maintain a full caseload. And then I moved back to Melbourne after completing that master's, and worked for someone else for probably 18 months to 2 years. So probably 5 years in total of working for someone else before
Right.
I sort of realized, look, the environment that I wanted to treat in, and some of the assessments that I wanted to perform and rehab that I wanted to prescribe, probably there wasn't an environment like that out there, that existed at the time, going back, sort of 12 years or so,
Hmm.
that could do that. So that's where I sort of went out and started to expand on my own.
Okay. All right. And tell us about that. So, what was obviously, you've just mentioned the thought process behind that and the reasoning for it. What was what did you have to go look for? Like a space, what were your intentions? What did you want to do in that space?
Yeah, so I guess the big philosophy that I sort of wanted to put in at the time was I guess more in an open type area where you could flow pretty naturally from the treatment space into that movement space. And so people weren't coming in and thinking they're just going to lie down for, the full 30 minutes or, 1 hour through
Mm.
that session, where there's going to be some up and down and some sort of testing and retesting. And for me, it was a big technology focus. I went out there, I think it's probably the first clinic in Australia to put in some force plates, put in lots of dynamometers and that type of thing, a video capture system, wearable sensors. So for me, it was really technology driven, to start to collect as much data as we can on all the different capacities, and then obviously put in a lot of heavy strength equipment, which again,
Hmm.
at the time there wasn't too many clinics out there which had leg presses and leg extensions and squat racks and those types of things.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, and how did you find I guess, the reaction from either the public or within your own profession? Was that something that you found was quite, was there a quite a uptake of that?
Well, I think we went from 0 to 150 patients per week in 4 months. So the approach was received really well. I think it was a little bit different to what people had experienced, I guess, elsewhere at the time. But also there was a bit more engagement, I guess, in the process from patients, because they could actually see exactly where they're at the time, and they knew
Mm.
exactly where they needed to get to from a goals-based approach. And so it really helped with that engagement and keeping people there to actually stick to the plan and reach their goals, which is what we all get into profession for. We want to all make, life-lasting changes,
Yeah.
lifelong changes for people. But a lot of the time, in the traditional environments that I was working in, you'd see someone 2-3 times, they'd start to feel better, and then, they'd disappear, or you discharge them because that was, basically all you could do, and you hadn't
Mm.
really taken them far enough to that capacity. So for me, it was well received. At the same time, I think the year before I started the clinic, I'd also started an education company around some products that I developed as well. And so
Mhm.
at that exact time when we opened the clinic, we also got an invite to start to run courses in Hong Kong and Taiwan. And that's where I sort of saw the problem that I sort of had as a young practitioner, and that we're starting to see with a few courses in Australia, that the problems that people are having here in regards to people coming back with the same types of injuries, people losing satisfaction in their practice and that sort of things, and not seeing those lifelong sort of changes or those life changing outcomes. We
Mm.
started to see it was a problem around the world, and so for me, then the big problem came is, I've got sort of 2 companies which are growing at an extremely quick rate. And then I added a third one in about another sort of 18 months later. And so that's when the challenges, I guess, became really confronting, that we just got really busy in all 3 companies really quickly.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, I guess then going on from that, how did you find the uptake from the profession? I mean, let's say, Stephen's there and he's doing his thing and he's caught into this kind of, I wouldn't say it's new. I don't think those ideas are new. They've always been around, but you've probably gone and you've systemized them and you've made the assessment a bit more, I guess, process driven, so that you can actually repeat it. And when you can repeat something quite consistently, you can then have a consistent outcome. So it looks like you've done that quite well. Once you've done that and you've gone, hey guys, I've got something over here. You're like, did you find that your fellow health professionals kind of were quite intrigued, or did you find some pushback? Well, what did you find out there? Hello, everyone. I'd like to take a quick moment to thank everyone for watching and listening to the podcast. If you have received value from this episode, the kindest thing you can do for me is to like, share, follow, and subscribe to the channel on whichever platform that you are listening on. If any of the conversations have resonated with you and you feel that I can help elevate your practice, you can find me at successinpractice.net. That is, the Success in Practice program can be found at successinpractice.net. The Success in Practice program is the signature program that takes a practitioner who may be struggling with retaining patients. They may not be certain about building effective treatment strategies, and they may feel somewhat anxious and doubtful about what they are going to do with a patient. And they are not really accelerating in the real world of private practice. It takes this practitioner and it turns their careers right around to the point where the patients have an effective diagnosis and a real treatment plan that they can take home. Patients are happy to book in multiple sessions with you and they are confident about your abilities. And more importantly, you now have direction and are confident about your own abilities. The program streamlines how you operate as a practitioner. Guys, you should have been taught this at university, but you weren't. You may have been practicing for the last few years thinking there has to be a better way. There has to be a more effective way of engaging with patients and getting them results. Well, there is. And this is what the program delivers. Go to successinpractice.net and check out the options available to you. See where I can help you easily grow your patient list and finally earn the rewarding income that you deserve. For all the information on how you can reach me personally, check out the show notes. Also in the show notes, you'll find a link to the chat transcripts from these podcasts. These are valuable and a wealth of information. I really hope that you're enjoying the podcast. Guys, leave a comment if there's any questions on this episode. And please, don't forget to like, share, follow, and subscribe to the channel. Now, back to the show.
Look, there's a little bit of both, to be honest. So from a course point of view, like we never really had any intentions to run many courses. We just had a few colleagues who said, "Look, looks like you're doing some interesting stuff. Can you teach us how to do it?" And then I think the first course we had 12 people, and then a few other people reached out. I think the next course we had 20 people, and then in the next 12 months, I think we'd run 12 courses around Australia, all sort of sold out. And then, once we got to the invite over to Hong Kong and Taiwan, it was sort of that great phase on social media where you could put one post out and without any, money behind it, you'd hit 100,000 people. That we started to see that got really well received. And I think, now we've run over 10 years later, courses in over 30 countries, and we've had over 20,000 people complete the courses. So, it's been really well received, but there has been road bumps along the way. Skeptics, I think when it came out, people like Adam Meekins and stuff sort of, which I'm sure a lot of the listeners are aware, tends to call out a lot of people on social media and said, look, here's another, functional movement system. Here's some more bogus stuff. So that was a little bit of a challenging point when we started to get called out by a few of his followers and stuff. But, the full circle came about 3 years later when he was the first person to reach out for some of the new technology that I created to purchase that. Yep. So, people are afraid of change, I think. And still today, I think you still see people a little bit, potentially skeptical, of what we do. But, what we try and do is not change what people do, just enhance it and help people make better decisions based upon data and start to remove maybe some of our own biases from actually what we're doing and step back and actually bring the research into practice. And so every person, every patient you see, is an N equals 1 case study.
Yeah. How did you deal with that specific challenge that you described? Sorry, I missed that name that you mentioned. Was it
so Adam Meekins? Yeah. So we had lots of conversations online at the time.
I don't know who Adam Meekins is, so enlighten me and enlighten the listeners. What was the situation around that time, and how did you handle it?
Yeah, so he was someone who's got a big following, still does today. And often when he, his sort of, posting style, I guess, is a bit more on the negative side, which tends to, probably from a social media point of view, get a lot more traction and interaction and stuff too. So that was a little bit, challenging at the time, but we just stuck to what we're doing and, the processes, and we were, really convinced that, what we're doing is actually, what people need. And as I said, it's been validated.
What were the main, I guess, challenges? Like what was thrown at you? Like what was said about your system that was,
a lot of it was unbased. People hadn't actually looked into what what we're actually doing. I think people saw one or two words in a couple of different videos or posts and have sort of then run with it. So
that was straw manning your particular position.
100%. And even Adam himself, had seen one video which someone had tagged him in, and he'd gone and shared this and said, "Oh, this stuff's crap," without actually looking into it at all or what we do or even speaking to us. And I think that's often the problem with social media, and I'm sure you're seeing it now as you speak to more people in the profession. Actually, everyone's actually reasonably similar, I guess, and talking about similar things, just in a different way, different structure. And a lot of the time, what people say on social media, isn't what they'd say to your face as well. And so certain people have different brands and bring a negative approach to it, and that's fine. But I think what I've learned over the last 10 years is to not worry about those people and stay focused on what you're doing, and hopefully create some great outcomes for the people who do your stuff or use your products and their patients and clients as well.
Yeah, one of the things that I've observed and I've learned is that whether you're in practice, whether you're in the tech space, whether you're in doing what you're doing, the ability for you to kind of throw water off a duck's back and kind of just keep moving forward is, I think, the single most important factor in the success of anyone trying to create anything or develop anything, or just kind of palming all that negative energy off your back and moving forward is a real, I don't know whether it's a talent that you can build or just a personality trait. I think it's probably more of a personality trait than something you can build upon. But that's been a common theme amongst people who have, I guess, been quite successful across different industries. Would you agree with that, Stephen?
Yeah, look, you're not going to say at times it doesn't get to you, and certain comments and things don't frustrate you. So I think I've definitely got better at managing it over time. So I think it is a skill that you can improve. So rather than going straight into the attack mode, which I probably did in my younger years, now sort of sitting back and starting to try and engage and educate people, I guess. And there's some people who you're just not going to be able to educate, or it's just not the right time. And I think the Adam Meakin's example was a perfect example where 3 years later he's come to me, the first person to send me a private message saying, "Look, how can I buy this stuff? I'm really keen." So it's funny how it works.
Yeah, right. I want to discuss your time working with the athletic population. Is that, given what you're doing now and the kind of specificity in terms of what you're trying to test and what you're trying to improve, has obviously that lent itself more towards people who are looking into performance?
I think that's probably the most common misconception that people have around, what I do and utilizing data and collecting data in general. For me, it's just as important for your 70-year-old, grandmother who just wants to be able to play with her grandchildren and get up and down off the floor or go for a 3-kilometer walk every morning, as it is for that elite athlete returning to sport. And so for us, we sort of teach a framework and I guess all the different capacities that we need to assess, talking about movement patterns, balance and proprioception, speed and agility, just as important for an old person to be able to move and be agile as it is for someone getting back to the sports field. Obviously, a fitness capacity people need, and then all the muscle capacities like strength and flexibility and stuff. So people need those to achieve their goals. And just because someone's goals aren't running at 25 kilometers an hour, changing direction, kicking your football 50 meters, doesn't necessarily mean that data's not going to be useful for that approach. And a lot of time, a lot of the decisions and things we do in practice is driven by what we see in research. And the way that they do the research is by collecting data. But often, in those populations, we don't bring data into practice. I guess that's what I've been trying to preach for the last 10 to 15 years is how we can bring that into practice and make some of the technology we see a lot of that research done with accessible for people in practice.
Yeah, right. So give us an example, mate, of how, I guess, your particular assessment technology can just help the average 60-year-old or 50-year-old parent who's struggling with some lower back pain, who just seems to keep getting the niggles, keep coming back, just isn't improving. Obviously, there might be some degenerative factors involved, but in saying that, how would your particular assessment methodology help them more so than just what we see traditionally in the clinic?
Yeah, so I guess, look, those degenerative factors get blamed, quite a lot. And there's a lot of people who we do see those on scans who actually, once you build the capacity in their tissues for what they need to do, you actually find that that's, potentially not a cause of their pain or their symptoms at all. It's just that they were lacking the capacity to do the things they need to do. So they're loading up maybe some of those more passive structures, or life's just difficult. A good example, is just, someone being able to walk up a flight of stairs as they get older. You need to be able to put 1.2 to 1.3 times your body weight through your leg to do that. If you don't, your body's going to start to reduce flexibility, close down and reduce, neural sort of tissues. It's going to start to load up other parts of the body to sort of compensate. So a lot of the time, if a lot of people just lose that capacity as they age, as our muscle sort of strength and size is going down each year, if you're not doing something about it, to the point where their strength becomes below what the demands of just simple day-to-day tasks like walking up a flight of stairs are. I can't tell you how many people come into the clinic over the years who just don't have the capacity to walk around day to day in their day-to-day lives and the forces that work upon them.
Yeah, and so in what way would your particular assessment technology help the practitioner? I guess help the patient. So how would that happen? Are you specifically measuring for things that relate directly to everyday life?
Yeah, so you're looking at the functional movements, as we sort of said before. You're having a look at you're measuring their balance and proprioceptive capacity. You're testing out their flexibility and measuring that. You're looking at their endurance and their sort of max sort of strength. You're looking at their fatigability and how long they can sustain stuff for, or their fitness levels. So being able to put a number to all of those and say, look, this is where you're at and this is where you need to be, based upon the task you're doing, but also this is how you compare to people similar ages, heights, weights, and actually bringing that into practice to actually see, oh, look, you haven't got much of an imbalance side by side, but actually you're 30% lower than where you should be for a person of a similar age and height. So that, again, no wonder life, is a little bit challenging. And then you can start to work towards that capacity and monitor that alongside their symptoms and actually see what effect, is that having on them. And again, that may or may not change, but there's a lot of patients that, I've had come over the years have been diagnosed with chronic pain. They're a chronic pain patient, and actually you just look at them, they just haven't got the capacity to live life and to get out of bed each day. So a lot of people, I think, because we're not taking our assessment beyond those, I guess the traditional orthopedic models, again, we're not probably developing people's capacities for what they need to be able to do.
Yeah. All right. Well, given that, my next question is more around in terms of outcomes, and like obviously as a practitioner, outcomes are king, right? Like patients want to see you because they want to get a certain outcome. How are you collating data that would, I guess, be more outcome driven? So to be more specific, a patient comes to see a practitioner, they're using your particular assessment technology. Is that piece of technology collecting a lot of data on the outcomes, not just the actual results of the tests? Like, is there a correlation to the outcome at the end of it in terms of pain and so forth and function and all those kind of things? And have you been able to put those into some kind of either research capacity, or is there research out there that's supporting what you do?
Yeah, look, there's lots of research. As I said, a lot of, what we do is bringing that research in, the existing research, I guess, into practice and making it accessible for people. But yeah, look, I said, all our different tools, whether it's, measuring flexibility, whether it's measuring strength, whether it's measuring, the ground reaction forces that are working on people day to day. It really does allow you to, try and identify those key capacities that people need to achieve their specific tasks.
Yeah. Okay.
There's over 22 different capacities that you can assess, and even things like your outcome measure, your patient reported outcome measures and stuff. Often that I think we all talk about and we've heard of, but a lot of the time don't get utilised in practice. You can have those alongside pain levels, and pain levels in particular, in all the different sort of tests and assessments. And you can start to track those alongside each other along the way to reaching their goals. And again, this is where you start to be able to, improve your reasoning. Is it a strength problem? Is it a flexibility problem? Is it more a central or behavioural problem? Or is there sort of other sort of, psychosocial sort of issues going on? So, it does help you to reason better, and you can rule out sort of different things.
Right. Steve, given your experience, have you found one particular physical characteristic within the physical realm, I guess? I mean, we talk about psychosocial and so forth as well, but I just want to put that aside for a second. But within the physical space, have you found a particular physical characteristic that, if improved, if I had to just improve one thing, if I improve that, it's going to make a huge difference in the long-term outcome of my patient?
Look, I think for one person who comes in with back pain, it may be more a flexibility based issue. For someone else, it may be more a strength issue. For someone else, it can be more a central behavioural issue. So I think me sitting here and probably saying, look, this one thing is the magic answer. I think that's where we've gone wrong as a profession for a long period of time. Whether that's been around manipulation's the answer, or muscle energy, or counter strain, particular techniques, or whether it's special muscles, it's the TA, it's the multifidus, it's the VMO. I think we all want an easy, answer. And for us, what we've tried to do is move away from some of those cookie cutter based approaches and actually assess the individual. I guess rather than just doing the same thing for every back pain patient that comes in, we're going to give them TA activation exercises. Back pain, incidence has only been getting greater over the last 20 years since this stuff's been improved. So I think the thing that we really try and emphasize is work out what's important for that specific individual that's standing in your room, and apply the research, the information that we have from the research and the normative values to that individual, rather than just applying a generic, this equals that. Yeah, I could come and say, look, strength's a pretty big capacity and something we could, everyone can, generally benefit from being a little bit stronger. But just because they get stronger doesn't necessarily mean it's going to improve their symptoms for that particular individual that's sitting in your room.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I've found that, I guess, strength covers, strength improves a lot of other physical capacities too, whereas other physical capacities may not improve strength, and so I guess, and in the layperson, it's usually the thing that is lacking in a lot of the conditions that we see. And the reason why I ask you that question is I don't think there's enough of an emphasis on it within education, right? And I guess we've got to start somewhere, right? Like, it's like trying to get a university student who's learning about osteopathy or physiotherapy or whatever to jump to exactly what you're doing. It's like, they need to understand the levels of it first. Whereas we at least, I think, should be emphasizing improving some of the physical characteristics like strength, like flexibility, mobility, agility, endurance. They're the 5 or 6 physical capacities that we don't even get taught about. And so just improving those and understanding basic things that to give a general improvement in someone's capacity in those areas, I think is it's a good start, right? Like, it's better than what we have at the moment.
Yeah, fits my bias 100%. And again, a lot of that comes back to being able to improve our assessment and start to put numbers on these things, and having easily accessible data to know whether someone is, strong or weak, I guess, if you term it. And, that's where, I've tried to make a lot of technology like dynamometers and stuff, affordable for everyone to be able to access. And, it's good to see that we've got lots of universities starting to put this stuff in so students can actually start to access this and get exposed to it early, which is really exciting. So, and I think we need to. I think our professions are going to change more in the next 5 years than they have in the last 50 years with the influence of AI and stuff coming into practice every day, especially in regards to clinical reasoning and decision making. So, I can go and put a case study into ChatGPT now, and it'll analyze and interpret the data that I put in. It'll go ahead and provide a treatment plan, and it'll set up a 12-week structured rehabilitation plan with essentially any prompts. So, I think we've got to be a little bit concerned that if you are doing the cookie cutter approach and you just, every back pain that comes in, you're manipulating their spine, every shoulder that comes in, you're just sort of treating their rotator cuff. If you're not going beyond that, or you're doing, the VMO activation stuff, you're going to get superseded and replaced pretty quickly by some of the AI and technology that's coming through.
Right. So given that, I want to go a little bit deeper there into the AI stuff that you mentioned. Given that the advances in AI and its ability to assess, AI at the moment can't treat, like it can't hands-on treat. And so there's a space there, and there's still a space there for that. Sorry, you were going to say something? You disagree with that?
No, I was going to say I was in a conference in Cologne sort of early last year, and there was actually 5 AI-driven treatment tools out there. So essentially, they're big robots that you would have typically seen in like a car, automotive manufacturing plant or production line. And essentially, they've got different attachments in there where they can go and do massage and sort of rhythmic mobilizations and scan the body as they're doing that, and measure sort of heat and those types of things while they're doing it. So I don't know, it's not that far away. There was 5 companies last year who were starting to sell these things where you could literally set up a treatment room, put in one of these machines and, plug in what you want it to do, and then, give it to the patient to start to do this. So I don't know, it's going to be an interesting space in the next 5 years.
I'll continue on with the question that I had, but given that I guess AI is moving so rapidly in that space, and maybe some of the more, I guess, things like assessing data and looking at data and creating treatment plans, and just the things that, like you mentioned, the cookie cutter things that practitioners might do. And there's nothing wrong with that, because people still need treatment plans, and that's a good thing. We're not discouraging people from that. But where do you see the role of the practitioner then? Where's the practitioner going to create their value, I guess, when now AI is doing all this stuff? Where's the value in the practitioner?
Yeah, so it's managing the individual, I guess, and working with the individual, towards their goal. So we're utilising a lot of these things to, help them, reach their goals and bring that whole plan together, I guess, bringing technology in. So I think that's where it is. Look, the empathy part and those types of capacities and skills are going to become more and more important. Obviously already a foundation, huge part of what we do, but that's going to be, significantly important going forward. But even then, looking, I saw a research study, a couple of months ago, which sort of said, that an AI-driven doctor was reported as having better empathy than an actual doctor when they compared patient satisfaction in studies. So I don't know. It's an interesting space and what's going on, and I think it's gonna be challenging. I think going forward for those who probably don't evolve. But I think from an osteopathy point of view, I think we probably stand in a better spot than most, where we still are doing a lot of hands-on skills and a lot of treatment. Where a lot of other professions, they're doing less and less of that sort of hands-on and have less of that point of difference to a machine that can program exercises, probably better than, and progress exercises probably better than, what you can do, and enhance, I guess, someone's performance.
Yeah, right. And I guess, given that you've said that, that was going to be my next question. Do you think that osteopaths are uniquely kind of positioned to drive that particular, I guess, practitioner? I don't want to say centered, but the practitioner then becomes somebody who is more in charge of the application rather than the actual specific treatment. Would that be correct?
100%. I think the osteopaths, especially with their clinical reasoning, sort of decision making skills, I think are often as good, if not better, than a lot of the other professions out there, and bringing everything together and also thinking a little bit differently. So I think osteopaths are really well placed to be able to manage that. And as I said, with their hands-on skills as well, I think that really sort of sets the profession apart. So it's important that I think osteopaths don't use that as we start to use this technology and start to probably move towards some of the other professions which are probably less hands-on based.
Well, a lot of this technology will be quite evidence-based and quite data-driven and quite kind of like, it's going to be, I guess, strength by numbers, as you would say. The numbers is really what drives what goes on. But I think osteopaths, given their particular ability to think outside the box, will especially be able to help people who require that difference, because they may not match what the evidence is out there, what the evidence is saying out there. And so we still need to think outside the box. And that's, I guess, where our thought process and our philosophy become even more important. And so, the next question on that, Steve, is, given what you just said, we had this little conversation about AI and about technology. How do we make this less dry? It feels a bit dry, as we kind of go into this whole, data-driven AI, how do we make it more personable?
Look, I don't think it's dry at all. I think it actually allows us to communicate better with people and actually educate people better about the benefits of what we're doing. I think it actually sort of rejuvenate people's practice who are just in the rut of, rubbing this, someone comes with back pain, they're sort of rubbing those paraspinal muscles in the QL and manipulating the low back. It can become quite monotonous, and you actually, lose a lot of those skills and that clinical reasoning because you just end up getting into this rut day to day where you're applying the same, techniques to everyone. And especially on we're all time poor in practice. It is easy to get into those ruts of, doing similar things and looking at those patterns that you've seen before. But actually bringing data in, I think, can really rejuvenate the practitioner as well. Someone who's even been out there doing this for 30 years in that they can actually start to see the benefits of what they're doing rather than just rely on, I feel better or not. Because a lot of the time there's some people who feel better, but actually maybe getting, the capacity may be getting worse and further away from where they need to be. And likewise, there may be some people who, don't feel good at all, but actually making huge improvements with. So you really need to be able to communicate that to patients. And I think that's what data allows us to do, is it allows us to, communicate better. And I don't think that's, dry at all.
Yeah, the meaning behind that was I've had a lot of conversations with people where especially a lot of experienced practitioners who would sit there and say to me, as I'm doing this technique, or as I'm kind of working on someone's thoracics or doing some rib springing, the patient will tell me about their sick daughter or their, the divorce they're going through or something like that. And there's usually some kind of trigger as to why a lot of their condition isn't really, pulling apart and opening up. And so do you think that there's a space for that, given that you're taking on a lot of, you're sitting there with a pen, you're writing numbers down, you're doing stuff, you're recording things, it becomes more movement based, and the push towards psychosocial. You're obviously creating data for the bio bit. How do we make sure that we don't lose that psychosocial aspect to it within the framework of what you're trying to do?
Yeah, look, as I said, I don't think we lose those skills at all in regards to the table-based stuff or the empathy-based stuff and getting that information, from people. I think it just helps our decision-making, better around that. And you can, collect some data around the psychosocial stuff with some of those, patient-reported outcome measures and that sort of stuff as well, which can enhance your decision-making. But for me, that informs an important part. And actually, if you know that bio, sort of part with regards to their strength and stuff, you can actually make better decisions on how much of an influence that psychosocial stuff's having. So I think it only enhances what we do. And that's probably one of the things that people often have against, bringing more data and objectivity into practice is, it's going to take away from stuff. For me, it's only going to actually enhance what you do, both in regards to hopefully treatment outcomes, but also communication between yourself, week to week, between you and your patient, and also the other people who are involved, in the healthcare space. We're getting, more, multifaceted, care teams involved and people involved with people. It helps us all speak the same language too. So I think that's, that's going to be the real strength. And I think we're osteopaths, set up really well to succeed with this new approach and new technology that's coming in.
Fair point. I want to ask you about, the multiple business that you run. You've got, how many businesses at the moment you're running?
No, I'm down to one now, which is good. One. So, yep.
So at one point you were running 3 businesses. Tell us about the challenges. Obviously the time challenges are there, but tell us about the challenges of kind of getting those up and running. And what did you find in terms of marketing? Like, what have you found really worked well in terms of giving you, making you less time poor?
Yeah, look, probably the hours I think you can't sort of replace. And look, I was doing 100-hour weeks for probably the best part of almost 10 years. So which wasn't healthy, but at the time, you don't know any different, and you actually function pretty well. You think you function pretty well doing that. It's not till you actually get beyond that phase where you see maybe there was better ways to go about it. But for me, it definitely was a challenge sort of managing staff, especially when a lot of I was spending 25, 26 weeks a year overseas. Sort of running courses and stuff. So trying to manage a clinic from afar was quite challenging, and keeping sort of staff engaged was a big challenge. So that was one of the big things, I guess, and issues that I probably had doing that, was trying to keep, the clinic sort of tick along, and it was definitely busy and successful, but actually making sure it was also a really great environment. It's pretty hard to do, and that everyone's probably 100% happy when you're on the other side of the world, and you're also trying to create new technology. You're doing a lot of the marketing and a lot of the other business sales and all that sort of stuff to 3 different companies can make it pretty challenging.
Yeah, right. And so at the moment you're down to one business.
Yep.
What have you found has been the driving factor in the growth of that? Has it been more your ability now to drive more marketing, more sales? What have you found has really improved in your particular skill set in the last, say, few years that's helped this business grow?
Look, I think focus is a big one. So obviously, just the more focused you are, I think, on something, the better sort of results and outcomes that you're going to get. But for me, probably missed part of this in your last question as well is like automation. Is a big part of what I do and trying to systemize things as much as we can. So a lot of those monotonous day-to-day tasks and stuff are just happening and automated in the background to allow you to focus on the stuff that you enjoy doing, or that I guess you're good at doing. So that's probably been a big thing that I've really tried to do. So outsourcing, when I can, but automating a lot of that. So again, you don't even have to worry about outsourcing a lot of those repetitive or boring tasks to people. And that's the thing I think that allowed me to to run those 3 businesses for a fair period of time, and to do those weeks and growing sort of 3 companies.
Yeah, right. I saw somewhere online that you had a download where you outline the 20 best tech tools for running a business, something like that. Was that correct?
Yeah, there would have been, I'd say, at some point.
Right. Yeah. I'm not gonna ask you for the 20 best, but give us your 3 best tech tools at the moment for running your particular business. What are you using at the moment?
Look, from more a clinical side of things, or sort of business side of things, I think Zapier and those types of programs can be sort of super useful to automate a lot of those tasks. So being really good at being able to find apps and technology that can plug into, a central platform that can sort of get all the data or information that you need in certain spots. So utilizing APIs and that sort of stuff. So I think if you've got a good understanding of your tech stack, and you can bring in whatever apps that's going to, I guess, complement that. That's probably a big thing. From a business point of view, I love trying to keep the personal in the business as well. So I often use things like Bonjoro or warm welcome, rather than sending boring emails. So I actually send video emails to people. And this was a big thing that I did in the clinic to try and stand out. So before someone would even come in, I'd send them a personalised video message based upon the information that they'd, put in the form. So, if they marked that they're coming in with back pain, I'd, make sure I mention that in there, in the specific video to them, and introduce myself. So before they actually walked in or I walked out to that waiting room, they already felt like they liked, knew, like, and trust me, hopefully a little bit. So I think, making things more personal in a world where, every time you go into a different website now, you're getting an AI bot and that sort of thing. Yep. I think if you can really try and keep the personal aspect in there is really important. So obviously, Bonjoro, Warm Welcome, those types of programs can help. And then obviously, the one that I spend all my days doing, obviously the Measures app, obviously is, our own app. So give a plug there. But, from an assessment point of view, putting everything into one place where you've got, soon to be 1,000 different assessments in your pocket, and 12 different testing tools in there currently, can bring everything into one place and help you sort of systemize and automate a lot of your assessment, and it lets you focus more on those soft skills and other things which are going to be really important going forward.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thanks for that, mate. What's the plan for you in the next 5 years? Where do you see your particular business growing to? Like, what do you want to do with it, and what are you hoping for this?
Yeah, so for me, it's trying to bring more, continue on the message, I guess, of bringing more data-driven assessments and technology into practice, and trying to help people, I guess, create those life-changing outcomes for people. So through making technology accessible. So the big thing that I try and do is make technology and software that's quick, simple, easy to use, and most importantly, it's affordable. You can afford to put you give one to every team member, put one in every room of the business, so that everyone can use it in their day-to-day workflow, and try and actually speed up what people do rather than slow it down. And I think that's where a lot of people go wrong with technology. They'll go and spend a lot of money on really expensive technology, and it just won't get used either because it's, it takes too long to use, it's too complicated, and the team's not, sure how to use it. Or when the team wants to use it, someone else is using it, or they can't find it because it's been put somewhere else. So for me, trying to save people time in their day and allow them to do the things that they enjoy doing, I think that's what's sort of given me a lot of success and enjoyment in what I do day to day, is focusing on the stuff that I love to do. And I know that that does the same. You'd be the same for what people do in your practice.
Yeah, definitely, mate. I know you're not practicing as much these days in terms of face-to-face stuff. Do you still see clients when you're assessing, I guess, your particular assessment tools? Like, are you still running tests and so forth?
100%. So that's the big thing that we need to do to continue to develop technology is actually utilize it in practice and stuff. So while I don't have the clinic anymore, I still see a few patients and test the stuff out with people, and I've also got a network of different clinics who test out a lot of the stuff for me, and so I often go in there and work with them and their patients and clients to to see how things work and see what we can do better.
Do you ever see a client and you look at them and you go, mate, I just got to smash that QL, just lay down and I'll give it a bit of a, does that still you kind of just see it and go, I'm just going to hit that?
100%. Yeah, there's definitely times where I think that another big mistake where people go, implementing technology or a more movement-based approach is they forget the basic stuff. People still come into us and they want to feel better. And so it's really important, especially in those initial 2 to 4 weeks, to make sure you make people feel better and get their symptoms under control. But I guess the thing that, and probably where I got frustrated early in practice is, look, you get the symptoms better, but actually they
next level.
Yeah, but they come back in 3 or 4 weeks with the same tight QL. And so that's where I was thinking, look, I'm missing something. They keep coming back with this tightness in this spot. Why? And I think that's where better assessment allows you to get to the cause of the problems.
Yeah, great. I want to speak to you. You've been involved in many different organisations. I think Sports Medicine Australia, Massage Australia, the Australian Physiotherapy Association, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think you sat on the board of Osteopathy Australia as well. Is that correct?
Hello, everyone. Just a quick break to give you some information on where to best find me. The first place is the private Facebook group called the Successful Practitioner Pathway. I've set up this private group as a place where practitioners can go and get tips and advice on how to best accelerate their practice and improve their clinical practice skills. The second place to find me is at successinpractice.net. That is where the Success in Practice signature program is housed. You can find more information about me and how I can best help you achieve success in your practice. So the two best places, the private Facebook group, the Successful Practitioner Pathway, and successinpractice.net. I will link to both those places in the show notes. So for more information, please see the show notes. Now, enjoy, and back to the show.
I was on the exercise rehab committee as they were forming those subgroups, so not on the board. Yeah.
Right. So on the exercise rehab committee, what was your experience there working there? Were you able to achieve what you wanted to get done there? And was that a particularly good experience in terms of understanding the profession and the association?
I think anytime you can be involved with a committee or board, you definitely are going to learn a lot. And so for me, I learned a lot, and that was a really good project to be involved in. That there's been a great outcome, and there's that pathway for people now, I think, through those processes like the exercise rehab process, where people don't have to go back and add $20,000 and another master's degree to their study. And, I think that's really important. I think as professionals, especially in osteopathy, you hit the ceiling pretty quickly. You get out into practice and you see you cap out at your 50 or 60 or 150 patients per week, depending on how you structure your week. And you're going to hit a capacity and often hit it pretty quickly, usually inside that first 18 months to 2 years. So that's where people get into that rut and do that same stuff. So you've always got to be looking for something else or having options there. I think, that's a great thing that, the Osteopathy Australia has done, is set up some pathways where people can look to, further themselves and get recognised for it. So I think that was, a really good thing to be a part of.
Yeah, right. And I guess were you able to, given your particular experience in terms of setting up what you've set up in terms of the business, you seem like somebody who, when you've set your mind to something, you like to get it done. Do you feel that that was a place where, I mean, did you go there with any particular reason to get something done, or was it just were you asked to go and join there and kind of help them restructure what they do? Or were you able to actually achieve what you wanted to achieve there?
Yeah, look, a lot of the times, a lot of these boards I've sat on is because I've been approached to be on there. But
Yep.
I guess there was a really specific, project there, and there's
Right.
that's Pete Lally who was managing at the time, who was
Mm.
really motivated and great for the profession there. But then for me, it sort of reached a point where I think where my skill set was probably best moved elsewhere, and my focus I think through I was probably around that same COVID time needed to go elsewhere, and that's when I moved on from that. But it's good to see that that's continued to evolve, and hopefully Osteopathy Australia continues to go down that path and provide people with different avenues to do stuff, not just from an exercise point of view, but some of those other niche areas. And I think it's going to be needed more so in the next few years than it has been before. And I've got probably a bias towards niching down. I think osteopathy is, always we see ourselves as generalists, but I don't think there's anything wrong with being a generalist with a speciality or a focus more on a particular area. I think that's where you can really, get enjoyment from. And so for me, getting back down in my practice to primarily working with athletes, who are having issues with running or ACLs, that was the stuff I loved to do and made day-to-day practice sort of really enjoyable, seeing those 99% of the day, rather than getting that EPC, CDM come in, who, was never going to be compliant with anything and probably never going to stay on beyond that 1 or 2 sessions they were referred to the osteo for because the GP needed to put another profession on there apart from physio.
Yeah, you're right. I think niching down is not a bad way to go if that's where you want to go. The problem arises, I think, when you do it too quick, like you come straight out of uni and go, I want to treat, PCOS and that's all I want to do, I think you need to get that. You need to get your hands on people. You need to get experience. The generalist type of approach helps you understand that, 80% of the problems out there, mechanically speaking, you can find similar patterns amongst them. And if you learn those patterns really well, then your niche becomes actually a lot more, you become better at the niche that you want to go into. So, but that doesn't take a long time. I think within the first 5 years of practice, 5 to 10 years of practice, you could probably start to look at enjoying something that you like to see a lot more. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think it's when you kind of you start to sprint before you can crawl, is where you get caught out a little bit. And so, I agree with that, mate. Where do you see some of the, I'll start with, there's a two-sided question here. I want to start with the optimistic side of you. Where do you see some of the opportunities for osteopathy in the next, say, 10 years? Where do you think we're well positioned to strike on some certain things that you can see?
Yeah, look, I think we've already touched on a little bit. I think that hands-on approach and that sort of treatment, based approach is something we shouldn't, lose, I guess, and we shouldn't be necessarily moving away from that. I think that's a real differentiator from some of the other professions. Look, I know hiring a number of physios over the years, look, often it's hard to get new graduate physios to touch a patient. So I think it's, patients there's been a big growth in osteopathy, I think, over the last, 20 years. And I think a lot of that success has come down to, the treatment-based approach and spending more time with people. So I think that's a really area we can, focus on and get down to. I think we, probably the opportunities there, we need to, show the evidence behind what we're doing and justify our stuff. Not only, in our own treatments, bring in more data to show the effectiveness of what we're doing, but also from a higher level, educational and research point of view as well. I think there's big opportunities there to show the benefits of what we do.
Yeah, right. And where do you see the major challenges for what we're in the way that we're positioned now? Where do you see some defaults or some weak links and some challenges that need to be addressed?
Yeah, look, I don't think it's necessarily just osteopathy alone, but I think there's going to be some big changes in the insurance space. I think there's going to be some changes in how people access care probably over the next 5 to 10 years. And we're already starting to see that with, health funds dictating, more, what people can spend and who they go to and those types of things. And I think that's only going to get more challenging, especially if we don't adopt an outcome-driven approach rather than just a feel-better type approach. I think, from an insurance point of view, obviously we've mentioned from a government point of view, there's probably going to be some, potentially some challenges there in keeping our space and our, niche, I guess, in the healthcare industry and what we do and how we differentiate ourselves from others. And also just from a funding point of view, how the funding is going to change potentially for things. And we're already seeing that with like NDIS and, big changes and stuff that's coming in there, and how, they're potentially looking to cut down on spending in certain areas and that type of thing. So there's going to be some challenges, especially if you base your business around a lot of those types of populations, a lot of insurance work or a lot of, third party work, whether that's from, your TAC motor accident type of people or your government, NDIS or CDM type approaches as well. So it's really important to, I think, trying to stand out and try and get as many, I guess, private, sort of patients as you can, which I think, again, is a space where osteopathy is currently set up pretty well because that's where it's come from.
Stephen, if you were, let's say you're the czar and king of osteopathy, how would you address some of those challenges? Like, it's good to point them out. How would you actually address making sure that they don't bite us in the backside, mate? What would you be doing differently?
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes back to probably partnering with, universities and trying to develop some programs, some research programs and stuff to help to do that. Trying to encourage, which I think they have done over the years, but trying to encourage more case studies and that sort of thing, but actually put an incentive behind that to try and build a greater research base behind what we do. And I think, look, approaching some of the meetings and representation, I guess, of osteopathy, with things like NDIS and those types of areas with a better understanding of what those programs involve. Like, I know I have sat in one of those meetings, with the NDIS, with Osteopathy Australia, and it was sort of pretty clear they didn't really understand, what the program was and how osteopathy could fit into that alongside, physiotherapy and exercise physiology and what we could bring to the space. So I think it's really ensuring that they've got a well-rounded plan before going down those paths, because it's great to get meetings with those people. But if you get there and there's not really a plan behind it, it makes it quite challenging, or you don't have a good understanding of what they're after. It makes it pretty challenging to, try and get osteopathy greater access and representation and recognition in those programs.
Yeah, it's great getting a meeting, but I think if you don't do well at that meeting, that could actually be worse for you than getting the meeting. You're better off not having a meeting, because once you screw it up, you can't unscrew it. Do you think we have a problem with volume, Stephen? Like, I think looking back at the history of osteopathy, there's been boom times, and there was, especially with the Vic Uni and RMIT courses kind of starting to really pump out students in Victoria. We've seen a real boom in Victoria, whereas Sydney's kind of lagged back a little bit. There was a boom in Sydney back in the 90s, in the late 90s and early 2000s, and the 2010s when we had the UWS course there. But do you find that where, volume is important? The more osteopaths we get out there, the more people will know who we are, and then we might get a bit more traction with government. We might get a bit more traction with health funds. So do we have a volume problem? Do you think we have a volume problem? Do you think we need more courses in Sydney, more in Adelaide, more in, in either more of the capital cities, or even North Queensland would probably do with one as well?
Look, yeah, volume's obviously going to help, but I don't think it's necessarily, the answer to solve all the issues, I guess, that we're having. It'll help with the recognition and branding potentially a little bit, but, the same things we're talking about, on this podcast and issues with osteopathy, I can tell you the physio sort of association and stuff are talking about exactly the same things and having the same problems. And if you go into the business owners forum on, for osteopaths versus the business owners forum for physiotherapists, they're all talking about the same sort of problems and issues as well. So, and they've got, 10 times the amount of, or more therapists in Australia than we do in osteopathy. So I don't think volume necessarily alone, is going to solve the issues. It's really trying to nut out exactly what osteopaths do really well. And I think that's what S has done really well for exercise physiologists, is they've really honed down the scope of where exercise physiologists fit into the healthcare space. And I think that's, they've done a really good job in taking away probably a lot of work from osteopaths and physiotherapists in particular, through their great advocacy, but also just their branding on what do we actually do? I think that's hard with osteopathy when there are so many different streams of osteopathy and everybody's got their own agenda, rather than just coming together necessarily, bring everyone together and say, look, this is the core framework of what we do. And you can have your own, specialist. Physiotherapy's got that. Exercise physiology's definitely got that too. But I just don't think we have that core focus of what makes us really clear, and we can't communicate how that benefits for the insurers, for the for governments and those other third parties.
Yeah, you're right there. I think we need a bit more unity within the profession, and also a position statement on what we do as osteopaths. That I don't know if that's actually existing. I haven't seen it if it does exist, but a position statement, I think, based on what we do as osteopaths and who we are, and I think that'll make our marketing a lot easier as well. So I definitely agree with you on that. Stephen, how can people access what you do, mate? Tell us exactly what you're doing in terms of your assessment technologies, like what the name of the company is, what you're doing, and how can people access what you're trying to do? Where can they reach you?
Yeah, so the company's Movement Assessment Technologies, or MAT for short. You can find us at matassessment.com, MAT-assessment.com. And we've got a range of courses around how you can bring data into your practice to help improve your decision making and enhance what you do. Again, try and give you some enjoyment back into practice. And as I said, data is not something to be afraid of. It's something that can actually help you and show you and justify, I guess, what you're doing. You can improve your communication. And then obviously we've got some software, our Measures app, which, as I said, soon is going to have over 1,000 assessments sitting in your pocket there you can use, with lots of cool tools to measure range of motion and flexibility, and some artificial intelligence and augmented reality built into there. And then we've got a number of different devices to be able to measure sort of primarily strength, power and movement patterns as well. So confident to say, look, our devices have the highest specs on the market, or up there with the highest specs on the market at the lowest price. So trying to bring this technology, which has traditionally been unaffordable for private practice, and make it affordable to be able to give one to each team member.
Yeah, great. All right, well, Stephen, thank you for joining me today, mate, on the podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you're a busy guy. For everyone else, that's the end of the podcast. I'll catch you on the next episode. Stephen, stay on the line with me, but for everyone, have a good evening.